All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Agarichis. I am the risk control consultant in the Northwest region, and I've been with TAC for just under a year now. And I am with,
I'm Isaac Garcia. I am the risk control consultant for the southeast part of the state. I've been with TAC for about 10 years now. And today we're kind of moving into winter weather. So we wanted to throw up a couple of reminders out there and remind you all what we should be doing to prepare our counties for uh, possible adverse weather or just winter weather in general. So we're going to get started and start talking off a little bit about, see if I can change a slide here, even just a second. I opened up too many windows. There we go. Start talking off a little bit about winter weather and how it's affected us in the past. What do we got up on the screen, Nick?
so here's just a little picture of, we all probably remember a little bit too much, but back in 2021, in February, we had Winter Storm Uri, or as some people call it, Snowmageddon. But this is just a picture that shows the magnitude of what it was. Just a few little facts with it. When it happened, 80% of Texas was affected by snow. And if you see, even Houston was affected by it. Me and my family, we lived down in Huntsville, Texas at the time of this, and it was just a different breed. And it just goes to show you guys that just because where you're at doesn't mean you can't be affected by this weather.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize that even though we may not be covered by snow, so like you can see on this map, 80% of Texas is covered in snow. My hometown is McAllen, Texas, which is Hidalgo County. You could see here that they aren't covered in snow, but their power still went out. They still were dealing with the effects of the winter weather. So even though we may not be affected directly by the winter weather, our economy is connected, our grid is connected. We are going to see residual effects trickle down to us. Doesn't matter what part of the state we're in, we're going to see those effects. So it's important to realize again that these storms do happen. And sometimes, even though we may not be directly affected, we're still going to be affected by it. So obviously, here we do have severe weather events. Up on the screen, we also have the statement, low frequency, high severity. What do we mean by that, Nick?
So when we talk about low frequency, high severity, we're talking about a singular event that has almost a catastrophic repercussions.
So very similar to Uri there.
Correct. And kind of like you said, Isaac, just because it happens one place, there's a trickle effect to where you may not be directly affected by the weather, but you're affected by the repercussions of it, as we saw with the power grid when Uri came through in 21. So that kind of segues into the next part, the unique operations.
Well, let me bring it back just a little bit here. So the low frequency, I think this is a big thing for some of us. Low frequency, all we're saying there is winter events in Texas don't happen very often. It's not very frequently that, I think in Austin, we may see snow once every 4 years. If you're further south than us, you probably see it way less than that. But that low frequency can cause danger. And the reason that causes danger is because when it happens so infrequently, we really become complacent with how we prepare for these things. We say, hey, you know what? The last storm was Winter Storm Uri. It didn't really affect us. So I don't really need to prepare. But the fact that it did happen means that it can happen again. And we need to make sure that we are preparing for those high severity events, regardless of how frequently they happen. So you were about to talk a little bit about the unique operations that county governments face with this.
Yeah, absolutely. So with county government, we aren't able to shut down when this happens. We have essential personnel that happens, and we also have unique operations. Some counties may have hospitals or emergency districts that they need to continue operating during this. And that's a unique operation. we're not Starbucks. We can't just say we're gonna shut down for the day because, the weather's bad. We have to keep moving. So we have to think about those unique operations throughout this. And why don't we talk about some ways to prepare for those challenges?
Yeah, so in preparing for those challenges, there's a few different areas that we like to focus on. You'll see here on the screen are a few different areas, and we have employees emboldened, and the reason is because employees really are our number one resource. You've heard us say it, you'll hear many people say it. Employees are our number one resource, and oftentimes in counties, employees are not just employees, there are friends, there are family, there are community, and they really are our number one resource. We need to be doing our best to make sure that we keep our employees safe. Second to that, we have facilities and infrastructure. And the reason we say facilities and infrastructure are second to that is because, or why they're so important is because when we talk about the TAC risk management pool, we are constantly, year after year, seeing increasing costs for the claims that are coming in for our facilities. Buildings are becoming more expensive, property damages are becoming more severe. This is definitely an area that we need to be paying attention to when it comes to the bang for the buck, seeing where we can save the most money. What about the other areas, Nick?
So you get into operations. Again, like we said, county keeps moving, no matter what the weather is. So we need to prepare for that and be ready for our essential operations to keep moving. And then we get into property. So we have, when we talk about property throughout this presentation, we're talking about vehicles and equipment. We have county vehicles out on the road throughout all this. We have county equipment that's being utilized throughout this. So being prepared and making sure those are ready to be used. And then we get into kind of the response and recovery aspect after the event.
So just for your information, this is the Carson County Courthouse up on the screen, just a little tidbit there. But now we're talking about facility preparedness. This is the Erath County Courthouse. When we talk about facility preparedness, the reason we got the county courthouse up on here is because usually the county courthouses are historical buildings, and in our counties, those historical buildings are gonna be those that are most susceptible towards the winter weather. Oftentimes, these buildings were not built to sustain these cold temperatures. The technology back then just wasn't there. We have a lot of single pane windows. We have a lot of attics that are uninsulated. We have just the nature of the building itself, thinking about me, my personal life and my body, the older I get, the harder it is to keep up. And the same thing goes with these facilities. The older they get, the harder they are to keep in good repair. The harder it is to protect them from that winter weather. As far as our facilities go, there's a few different things that we want to pay attention to when we're trying to prepare our buildings for this. But I will say the number one thing that we need to do, and the first thing that we need to do when protecting our property, our facilities, is to make sure that we have a good facility or property schedule. A lot of times when we have these properties, number one, we may not understand which properties we own in the county. I've gone on appraisal visits multiple times where a county has found out it had a couple more buildings than it thought it had. Sometimes paperwork doesn't go through, sometimes things get lost in transition between employees. We don't know what kind of buildings we have, number one. Number two, oftentimes if something's out of sight, it's out of mind. I went to a county one time where the maintenance director wanted me to take a look at some of their roofs. And we jumped up on the county courthouse, we jumped up on a county annex building, and they were in great condition. He said, we sweep the roofs twice a year. That not only gives us a chance to clean the roofs, but that gives us a chance to inspect every square foot of that roof. I asked him, what's the furthest building you have from the center of town? And he said, well, we got this senior citizen center a few miles out of town. So we went to go take a look at the senior citizen center, and unfortunately, that roof literally had trees growing out of it. Here, we went on the inside of the building, we talked to the staff there, they said, yeah, the roof leaks all the time, we just don't know who to report it to. So the moral of the story there is if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And keeping property or facility schedules in place, making sure that we have a list of our buildings, making sure we're doing regular inspections of our buildings, make sure that we're not forgetting about something. Nick, can you tell us a little bit about some of the hazards that we look for when we're talking about winter weather in our facilities?
Yeah, so when we're looking for hazards, we all know at our homes, we trickle water to keep those pipes warm, and we want to do that with our county facilities also. So when pipes burst, it's not actually from being frozen, it's from the ice thawing out in the pipes, right? So when water freezes, it expands approximately 9%, and then when it goes down, that's where you get your burst pipes. So ways to prevent that or mitigate that are gonna be wrapping your pipes, your exterior pipes, for sure. And then we can do the trickle, there's a county that's near and dear to my heart. Back in the day, I heard about that. They had an expo center, and Isaac talked about those facilities that are kind of outside of the town and such. So they had a big freeze during the weekend, and everybody came back Monday morning to just see water going everywhere. So they weren't expecting the freeze. They were all off for the weekend, came back, multiple pipes burst. So
Yeah, and when we talk about these pipes, just like our house, like Nick said, we want to protect those exposed pipes. One thing that is very different from our house that a lot of county buildings have is we have pipes running through our attic sometimes. Most of the time in our residential areas, we don't have those. But in county government, a lot of these older courthouses may have sprinkler systems in them. We had one county during Winter Storm Uri that their sprinkler system, their fire sprinkler system was in the attic of the courthouse. The attic was uninsulated and those pipes burst during the winter storm. That was a multi-million-dollar loss because once those pipes burst, all that water went down through every single floor of that courthouse. And it was a large remediation project that the county really had a hard time. It was definitely not a pleasant experience for them. So to prevent that, there's a lot of different things that we can do. When we're protecting our pipes, it's not just about wrapping them, but it's ensuring that they have good HVAC. So for example, Nick mentioned an arena. We have pipes flowing through a lot of these arenas. What you'll notice in some of these arenas, what they should have, you'll find heaters at pipe mains. These heaters typically have a thermostat on there that is controlled when the temperature drops below freezing or gets close to freezing. Those heaters kick on, making sure that those pipes don't freeze. If our buildings don't have that, there's lots of different options that we have. Like I said, we could wrap those pipes. There's also electrical wrap that you can use on those pipes as well. Basically, a wire heater that gets wrapped around the pipe. You plug it into a regular outlet and it's got a thermostat built into it, where if the temperature drops, again, close to freezing, that heater kicks on, making sure that we don't burst those pipes. But right now, the thing to do would be to go through your buildings and kind of ask yourself, where do we have these water mains going through? And what kind of temperatures might these areas experience during a freeze? It's something that we don't ask ourselves often enough, and if we do, it can definitely save a lot of heartache. As far as snow on roofs goes, we've seen a couple of structures collapse because of the weight of snow on roofs. And all of this doesn't just go to the snow, but it goes back to the building maintenance, making sure that we have good property schedules and we're inspecting our buildings beforehand. We always recommend that you look at your roofs twice a year, at least. We want to make sure that we're looking at our roofs before winter hits and we have that adverse weather coming in. And then we also want to make sure that we're looking at our roofs after the fact. after winter is gone, before the spring storms come, we want to see if there's any damage that our roofs have sustained. Yes, we're looking for areas like water intrusion, but we're also inspecting to see if there's any soft spots. Roofs don't just collapse. Even under the weight of snow, they don't just collapse. They give off indicators. There may be soft spots, there may be creaking, there may be areas where you see dips in the roof. All these areas should be inspected. So we need to make sure that we're checking those out frequently. What about sidewalks and walkways, Nick?
Yeah, so with sidewalks and walkways, as we mentioned, our first priority is our employees, right? So when we get this weather and they're out there walking, they're coming into work, we want to make sure it's going to be safe for them to walk on. And that could be putting down salt, that could be putting down sand. And then we have the unique situation where we have public come to our buildings also. So we need to protect the public too. So making sure that those walkways are safe for them to walk on. We want to try and prevent those slip, trip, and fall hazards that are there. Maybe try and prevent one of those general liability claims that could possibly arise from slippery surfaces with ice.
Yeah, and sometimes we're not able to fix the issues that may arise. Kitty litter and sand don't take care of everything, but again, going and doing those inspections, we can see the problem areas and we can maybe rope off those problem areas, restrict access to certain areas of our facilities that could cause injury. Again, we may not be able to fix it, but we can always put indicators somewhere in line to keep people safe. So one of my pet peeves, I don't know about you, Nick, is heaters. We definitely have a lot of people using heaters, maybe in areas that they shouldn't be using them, or maybe in ways that they shouldn't be using them. I will, before letting Nick talk about heaters here, I will say TAC recommends against the use of space heaters. I will say, we know a lot of these buildings do not have the greatest HVAC systems, so we know that in some cases they are necessary, but we do recommend against them whenever possible. But Nick, could you tell us a little bit about protecting ourselves from these space heaters?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest things from my past as a firefighter, one of the main causes of fires during the winter time is from space heaters. So there's multiple ways that they get started, but one of the first ones is overloading your electrical source. So these heaters need to be plugged into a wall outlet. We don't want to be overloading,
You don't want to be overloading the circuit.
right, the circuit.
Yeah, what we have happening and what you'll see over time, and I say over time, you'll see this in a lot of older buildings. You'll have somebody go and plug in their coffee maker. The breaker pops. So they go, they look at the breaker panel and it has a 15 amp breaker on it. They say, oh, we could probably bump that up a little bit. So they switch that 15 to a 10, I'm sorry, to a 20. And then later on, a couple of years later, somebody goes and plugs in the refrigerator next to the coffee maker. And the breaker pops. They go over there, they say, 20, we could probably bump that up to a 25, to a 30. A few years down the road, it gets bumped up again. And before you know it, we got a 10 amp breaker, or 10 amp circuit, that should be a 10 amp circuit, now has a 30, 35 amp breaker on it. That causes a problem. To avoid finding out where those problems are, we definitely don't want to find those problems the hard way. But to avoid that, one thing that we can do is make sure that anytime we're plugging in high current devices, that we're plugging them into different circuits. So if you have a north wall, it's safe to assume that all the outlets on that north wall are probably going to be on the same circuit. If I'm going to go plug in my refrigerator and now I need a space heater, I'm probably going to go plug my space heater into the south wall, making sure that it's on a different circuit. And when I say high current devices, we're not worried about things like cell phone chargers. We're not worried about things like computers. What we're really worried about are any devices that produce heat, any devices that cool, any devices that run a motor. So we're talking about things like your treadmill for your sit-stand work desk. We're talking about things like space heaters. We're talking about things like refrigerators, coffee makers, microwaves. Any of those devices we do consider to be high current devices. It's always a good idea to plug those away from each other. Don't have too many of them on the same circuit. Kind of coming back to space heaters, here we have space heaters being left unattended. What's the issue with that, Nick?
So we all get very comfortable, right? And we all know that we shouldn't leave heaters unattended, but there's always those times I'm gonna run down the hall real quick and I'll be back in 2 minutes and you say, I don't need to turn it off yet. So then what happens once you get down there? You start talking and next thing you know, it's been 30, 40 minutes. So that heater's been on that whole time. We want to make sure they're not left unattended. We want to make sure we cut them off if we're walking away. So even if it's for a couple minutes, we want to go ahead, cut that heater off to prevent a possible fire. And then we talk about this next one, the 3-foot rule. So we want to keep these heaters away at least 3 feet from flammable materials. We know in courthouses, office buildings, there's a lot of what we call fuel, so papers, desks, that's all fuel.
Decorative plants sometimes.
So that's all fuel for a fire, so all it takes is a little, one thing to start, and then it's a chain reaction, you know, fires grow at double the size every 60 seconds, so it moves pretty quick, so we want to keep that 3-foot rule from that heater.
Yeah, and on here you'll see a picture of a wood stove heater. Some of you may be laughing at that, but some of you may be looking in your office, looking at that fireplace, looking at that wood stove. We do have a lot of counties that have wood stoves, a lot of counties that have fireplaces in their historical buildings. These are great sources of heat. The building was designed to accommodate them. But there are some considerations that we need to be taking when we use them. Could you give us some general safety recommendations for these fuel or wood-fueled heaters, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. So just like the buildings, we want to keep these maintained. So at a minimum, I would say annually get them cleaned out. There are chimney sweeps and such. We want to get the old ash out of there. Make sure that there's not more material in there. So getting it on a schedule, making sure it's in good working order before the winter time hits. It's just like any other piece of equipment. You want to make sure it's ready to do its task and do it safely.
Yeah, and you want to make sure, if possible, you have one in your area, use a certified chimney sweep. I know you may laugh at when we say that, but yes, there is such a thing as a certified chimney sweep. I will say something is better than nothing, so getting somebody to clean it out, making sure that the ash is gone, making sure that the soot is gone. But if we can get a certified chimney sweep, that's even better. Coming back and rounding it back out to these electrical heaters, a few different things that we need to make sure that we are equipping our heaters with. What would you say those are, Nick?
So the tip switch protection, those for your electrical heaters, what that does is when that heater gets knocked over, it has a switch, a little fail safe in it that it shuts the heater off when it gets knocked over. So we want to make sure if we are utilizing these heaters that it has that implemented into it. And then you have timers also where it'll cut off for after a certain time. And that could be for your, hey, I ran down the hall and then you forgot about it. It'll shut off for you in a certain amount of time. And then as that picture shows in the top left there, we want to utilize certified heaters. We want to make sure it has that UL listed on that sticker there. Then that's saying that it's certified, it's got that fail safe in it.
Yeah, most of the time, unless you're buying your heater at a dollar store or off of Temu, most heaters are gonna be UL listed. Just make sure you're checking for that label, make sure you're buying it from a proper source. Lastly, here we have training and information. We oftentimes confuse this as common sense. I often say common sense is not common. One of our coworkers says common sense is like deodorant. Those who really need it don't use it. So that in mind, make sure that you're providing your employees this information. If you have a space heater policy, make sure that your employees know what that space heater policy is. Let them know where they're allowed to use it, when they're allowed to use it, making sure that they unplug them before they leave the buildings. These may seem like small trivial items, but these are gonna be the items that do cause fires. Um, so moving right along, coming to electrical safety. Could you tell us a little bit about what we need to know when it comes to electrical safety, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the event there is a fire due to electrical issues, first and foremost, we want to call 911. We want to get them on their way. They're the professionals. They're the ones that have all the tools. So get them on their way. Now, if it's possible, we want to unplug the appliance. So that's going to be situational. If you feel you can do it safely, get that appliance unplugged and then get out of the area. But if we're able to, we want to unplug the appliance. So next, if you have one, you can use a fire blanket. But if you do have a fire blanket, you want to make sure that whatever it is de-energized. So you have to have that appliance unplugged if you are going to utilize a fire.
Unplugged, switched off, breaker turned off, any of the above, right?
Right, right. So next, we have a Class C fire extinguisher. Now, if I were betting, man, you guys have probably one of the most common fire extinguishers in your building, and that's a ABC. So ABC fire extinguishers cover A, fires, which is ordinary combustibles. So that's your papers, your woods and such. B, fires, which is your flammable liquids. So any fuels or so like gasoline. And then you have your C, which is going to be your electrical fires. So when you're looking at your extinguishers, which you guys should be looking at them, hopefully at least monthly, making sure they're good to go. You want to make sure it has A, B, C, or just the C for electrical. But again, one of the most common ones is an ABC fire extinguisher. And then this last point here is evacuate the building. It's all situational, you guys. When you don't feel comfortable, get out. That's my main thing I can say here is let the fire department get there, let them do what they need to do. So evacuate the building and make sure you guys know where to go when you do evacuate.
Okay, now, we took a bit of a segue there, talking a lot about fire, I'm sorry, about heaters, but I will say, you know, electrical safety and heaters. The reason we talk so much about that is because this is the time of year when we have those fires. Winter weather always brings those electrical or those heater fires, so we need to make sure that we're, again, educating our employees, letting them know what they need to be doing. Moving on, now we're talking about building winterization. And here, we're not so much worried about cold air getting into the building. Obviously, we want to keep those pipes from bursting, but most of the time we're worried about that condensation. We're also worried about the water getting into the buildings. I will say water intrusion is going to be one of our biggest issues, can be very costly, especially in these historic buildings. Um, can you tell us what we need to be doing to winterize our buildings, Nick?
So when you guys are out there inspecting your buildings, you want to look at your seals on your doors and your windows. So look at that caulk and see if it's worn down, if it's gone. And if it is, we want to go ahead and get it resealed. So these older buildings that haven't been maintained or haven't been looked at for a while, that's why we say we really talk about these building schedules and inspecting them, just getting eyes on them. So that's your first and foremost thing right there. Get those seals on there, get it caulked, and then we talk about weather stripping. So you guys probably have weather stripping all your doors in your house, and you can feel that the elements coming in if it's not working right, if it's gone. So weather stripping is another key component of building winterization. And then Isaac mentioned earlier, some of these courthouses don't have any insulation, right?
Yeah, so, you know, here when we talk about insulation, this is definitely a large preventative measure. Taking a look at some of our older buildings and not only looking at the insulation, but looking at the windows, you know, anything that we can do to modernize these buildings, including adding double pane windows and insulation, can go leaps and bounds in preventing damage to our buildings during the winter months. A lot of times, the areas that we see in these older buildings, we see insulation that has compacted over time. That's something that, hey, we may be able to do ourselves, but it's also good to get a qualified contractor out there to look at it and say, hey, you know what? It looks compacted, but it still has its R rating, its insulation efficiency, or whether or not you need to replace it. Here, insulation is vitally important. Like we said, it helps keep some of that condensation at bay. Not only that, it helps our pipes from bursting in those winter months. When we talk about HVAC, just like anything else we got going on, we need to make sure that our HVAC is serviced on a regular basis. Here, this can be something as simple as making sure that we have our air filters clean. But it's about putting it on a schedule, and I will say that over and over again. In my personal life, I used to have a big issue with our HVAC filters. Every time I would go look at our filter, it'd be dirty. And the problem was I just wasn't changing it frequently enough. A simple solution for me was putting a calendar reminder every 2 months to go and swap out that AC filter. Once I have that calendar reminder on my phone, it's beeping every 2 months. It's not gonna let me go until I check it off that it's done, and that kind of saves me some heartache. Not only does this help ensure that our buildings are staying temperature regulated, but it also ensures that our equipment is not prematurely wearing out. If we are running units with clogged filters, if we are just running units with dirty ducts and not doing any maintenance on it, we're gonna have equipment prematurely wearing out, and that's gonna cost us more money in the long run. So keeping this equipment up to date, yes, is a risk management technique, but it also helps reduce our cost in operation later on.
Good stuff, Isaac. So now let's get into our property, which, as I mentioned before, when we talk about property in this presentation, we're talking about your vehicles and your equipment. So what are some ways we can deal with our property?
So, just like our facilities, we want to make sure that we get a good schedule for the vehicles and equipment that we have. Primarily on this, not only do we want to know what vehicles and equipment we have, but we want to know what their demand is going to look like during a winter emergency. So for example, let's say we have an elections vehicle. That elections vehicle, when it's snowing outside, when the streets are covered with ice, when a storm comes through and there's brush all over the road, we're probably not going to be using that vehicle. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we got a front loader on this picture here. We could be using that to move snow. We could be using that to move debris. We may be using other heavy equipment. We need to make sure that that equipment is good to go. So again, first and foremost, creating that schedule, not only to help us remember what pieces of equipment we have and how we're going to maintain that equipment, but also to understand what kind of demand we're going to have on our equipment. Moving on, just like our buildings, we want to make sure that we are checking our vehicles and equipment on a regular basis. Here, we say before winter comes. There's a few different issues that we've seen. For example, we may have some older vehicles and equipment that may be leaking radiator fluid. Most people will just go and put water in that radiator. I'm not gonna say that's something they should be doing. I'm not gonna say that's something they shouldn't be doing, but what we should be doing at minimum is making sure that our radiator fluid is good in all our vehicles before winter comes. We don't wanna find out in the middle of an emergency that somebody put water in a radiator and now that engine's frozen. So making sure that we're checking out this equipment beforehand. Kind of moving a little bit towards employee safety, what would you say we need to make sure that we keep in our vehicles?
So when we're putting these kits together for, especially with the winter time right now, we want to have some de-icing agents or salt, kitty litter, sand if you have it, and have that available. But if you're one of the essential workers that's out there working, and you have one of these kits and you're putting it together, you want to think of what do you need to sustain for 24 hours? So if you do get stuck out there for an extended period of time, you're going to need some food, you're going to need some water. You know, if you have any prescription medications that you take, you might want to have a couple in a Ziploc baggie that you bring in that kit also. And just any other supplies that you think you'll need, again, to sustain for roughly 24 hours, because when winter emergency hits, it could be pretty drastic. So you might be out there for a little bit until you can get some help. So being prepared and having these kits available is going to be a good practice for y'all.
Yeah, and getting a little ahead here, we also need to make sure that we're communicating that to our employees. Letting them know, hey, make sure you bring jackets, make sure you're wearing the proper layers. Make sure that you have water and other items available in your vehicle. And also making sure that they understand if we put emergency kits in those vehicles, making sure that they understand those emergency kits are there. And making sure they understand what the items are used for and how to use the items. Nick mentioned kitty litter. Some of you in this webinar may hear kitty litter and think to yourselves, what is that used for? Some of you may know very well what that's used for. And all that is, it's just a kitty litter absorbs water. And if the roads are icy and you fall into an ice patch or you fall into a snow patch, oftentimes if you pour kitty litter around your tires, you're able to get out of that because it absorbs all that moisture. That's something that may seem like common sense to some, but I guarantee you is not common sense to everybody. So again, make sure you communicate that to your employees. So now we're talking a little bit about continuity of operations. I'm just gonna start off here by saying communication is gonna be the biggest thing that we talk about when we talk about our continuity of operations. Nick, you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier. We have internal stakeholders and we have external stakeholders. Could you tell us a little bit about those internal and external stakeholders and a little bit about how we use an all hazards approach to when we look at maintaining our operations?
Yeah, so when we talk about our internal stakeholders, we're talking about our sheriff, our commissioners, county judge, of course, and then any department head that you want to be there that you think will be a part of this. And it should probably be all department heads, but it's all situational, right? And then when we talk about external, if something were to happen, so let's say your plumbing goes out, do we have somebody that can provide some porta potties for us? You know, if you're stuck in that EOC for an extended period of time, you're gonna need somewhere to use the restroom. If, you know, the electricity goes out, do we have somebody that can provide some generators for us so our essential operations can continue to work?
And it's about making sure that we have those conversations now. I know there's an equipment rental place down the street from me, but have I had the conversation with them of, hey, during a storm, can I count on you to provide generators or do you have commitments elsewhere? And making sure that you have those conversations now, and also making sure that you have a way to communicate in the event of an emergency. A lot of times counties will have satellite phone numbers. Do you know that your satellite phones are charged, ready to go? Do your vendors know what those phone numbers are? Does TAC know what those phone numbers are? If you all need to contact us during the event of an emergency, or we need to contact you, how are we gonna make sure that that communication happens? If your phone lines are down, we need to make sure that we have your contact information. You need to make sure that you're providing that not only to TAC, but again, to your other vendors that you're gonna be using in those emergency arrangements. The other thing that we talk about, the memorandums of understanding and mutual aid agreements. We need to make sure that if we have those in place, that we have good contact information with whoever we may have those in place with. Again, there's no way for us to let our neighbors know that we need help if we don't have their contact information. But we always use what's called an all hazards approach. Did we talk about this already? I may have missed it.
Not yet. So when Isaac says all hazards approach, what we're talking about is when you're making this plan, and yes, for this one, it's for a winter event, but when it's an all hazards approach, we want to be able to take that plan and it can be interchangeable. So you can use that plan for a hurricane, for any other severe event. So that's what we mean when we talk about an all hazards approach, and they're all similar at the end of the day. So when we're looking for those key stakeholders, internal and external, that's what we're looking at. And we want to be able to make sure that the plan we have put in place can be interchanged for all hazards.
Yeah, definitely. So we already talked about identifying key stakeholders, but we should also be looking at identifying key personnel. So here we want to make sure that to make sure that not only that we're taking care of our employees, making sure that they're staying safe, but we want to make sure that we're identifying that essential personnel that is going to keep our operational continuity, that's going to keep our counties running in the event of that emergency. So here, just like with our key stakeholders, we want to make sure that we have good methods of communication. And make sure that we discuss that beforehand. I had a treasurer one time tell me that during a flood, that her power went out, her lights went out, her communications went out altogether. And she had to tread through knee-deep water for a half a mile to her neighbor's house to be able to contact her employees and let them know, hey, I don't want you going into the office today, the roads are flooded. To avoid that, we need to make sure that we are creating different methods of communicating with our employees and also letting our employees know, hey, if you don't hear communication from me or from the county, this is what your standard operation is going to be. Either you're going to stay home or you're going to come to work. For example, a tax office, probably in the event of an emergency, is not going to need to be operating. But you let dispatch know, hey, unless you hear from others otherwise, or unless you communicate with us, we expect you to be here and we need you to be here. So identifying those essential employees and essential staff, and then going through what your policies, procedures, and plans are going to be.
So Isaac, when we talk about these procedures and plans, we want to be reviewing them, and that's kind of where an after action review, after an incident happens, you can learn from it. And that's your time to revamp your procedures or your plans. So maybe something didn't work out well, or maybe you want to add something. That's your time to do that. But we want to be, I would say, annually reviewing these plans to make sure we know what to do. It's there, it's good to go. And then we want to have a communication plan, like you were saying. We need to be able to relay this information to your departments and to your employees. So do you have a way to do that? Right.
Yeah, and a lot of this is about communication. We say training often. Training for employee safety is vitally important. But I will say training oftentimes is not the notion that we think it is. A lot of times we think of training in 1 hour segments. We think of people sitting down in a classroom and listening to a presentation. Training can be that, and oftentimes that is a good way of conducting training, but it could also be through email blasts. It could also be through pamphlets. It could also be through 15-minute toolbox talks. Training is just a way of increasing your communication with your employees, letting them know what is expected of them, what they need to be doing to stay safe, how you can possibly help them out. It's just increasing that communication. So when we talk about employee safety, again, here training is primary first most. But again, coming back to the notion that common sense is not common. A lot of this stuff may seem rudimentary, may seem very simple, but for some of our employees, it may not be something that they've experienced. For example, cold weather. Most people know for cold weather, when we talk about PPE, what we're talking about is we're talking about dressing in layers, dressing in natural fibers like wool socks, wool shirts. Those will keep us warm, those will keep us dry, and if we're dressing in layers, that keeps us, that allows us to peel off layers and stay dry that way as well. For some people, that may be common practice. For other people for me, I grew up in South Texas. It wasn't until my mid-20s that I really experienced real cold. I had no idea what dressing in layers was. So we need to make sure that we're communicating that to our employees and letting them know this is what you need to be doing to stay safe with regards to how they're behaving, with regards to the operations that they're conducting, with regards to how they're driving or how they're dressing or the PPE that they're using. We need to make sure that we're communicating that some way. Part of that also, emergency response and reporting. All I'll say about that is we need to make a area, and we've talked about it before in some of our conferences, but we need to make it where employees feel an emotional safety. In other words, that they feel that they can come to us with concerns. If they see something, we need to make sure that they are reporting that to us. And having it to where they feel safe enough to come report something to us without having backlash is very important. So making sure that we have that two-way communication. Anything else you want to add here when we talk about employee safety?
No, that's a great point right there at the end, Isaac. You know, TAC, we talk about safety culture every time we go somewhere, and just having that buy-in from your judge, your commissioners, and having your employees feel comfortable to go to them to bring everything up and knowing that it'll get fixed. It's all about confidence and being comfortable, right? You want your employees to be comfortable. You want them to be confident that when this weather event or whatever hazard happens, that they're confident they know what they're gonna do and what they need to do.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing about it is also understanding that the training and the communication needs to happen now. Oftentimes when we go and there's been an incident, the incident is usually when we think about what could we have done to prevent somebody from getting hurt or prevent a monetary loss or prevent building damage or vehicle damage. And oftentimes the answer is training. Did the employee know? Did staff know? Did the supervisor know? Did maintenance know? So making sure that we take care of that now. We want to, the sooner we take care of it, the better off we are.
And I've always been told this, we want to be proactive, not reactive. So we want to be proactive in our planning and being prepared.
So as far as response and recovery goes, this is where we say the real work starts. Most of the time, we're waiting out the storm. We want to make sure that when the storm is over, we don't just say, hey, great job, everybody, we survived and move forward. We want to make sure that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing after the fact. Part of that, like you'll see on here, interdepartmental communication, we need to make sure that our departments are communicating with us to let us know what may have happened during the storm. So what we're talking about there is any employee injuries that haven't been reported. We need to make sure all those are being reported. The quicker we get them reported into the workers' comp system, the better off we are. We're also talking about buildings there. So you'll see here at the very bottom, we have post-event inspections and the duty to mitigate. What this means is that counties have a duty to mitigate. If, for example, you have a roof leak, or let's say you have your windows blown out, we don't just say, okay, the windows are blown out and TAC will come take care of it. We say, yes, it's going to be taken care of, but in the meantime, until we can get somebody to come and fix these windows or replace these windows, we need to board up these windows. We need to tarp these windows. If you look in your coverage documents, they do say you do have a duty to mitigate. We work with you as best we can. If you need help with some of this, give us a call. Let us know, hey, we got some windows that are blown out. What do we need to do right now? We'll do our best to help you out. But again, it comes back to having those key stakeholders, those external key stakeholders in place. Do we have a roofing company on call that can come and tarp a roof if we have damage to it? Do we have a general contractor that can come and board up windows for us? Or is that something internal that we could possibly do internally? But in any case, we need to make sure that when the storm is over, we don't just say day is over. That's when the real work starts. That's when we start putting these temporary fixes in place. That's when we start the whole claims process. Anything else to add here, Nick?
No, I think you got it.
Okay, so just for y'all's information, we, just a little bit of a shameless plug here, we do have a new what we call our Phoenix trailer. This is gonna be our event response trailer. If you all ever sustain an event, if something happens, we have this trailer that we can deploy out to your county. And essentially on this trailer, we have a few different things. We'll have good water supply. We have, some sleeping arrangements for our staff if need be. But we also have internet connection. We also have multiple monitors in there and a good base of operations for y'all if needed. If you're interested in it, if you'd like to hear more about it, please feel free to contact us. But I will say TAC is a great resource for y'all. We talked a lot about training. For example, we talked about fire extinguisher training. We can provide fire extinguisher training for y'all. We have a fire extinguisher simulator. So not only do we talk about the different types of extinguishers that are out there, the different types of fires and how to prevent and fight those fires, but your employees actually leave understanding how to put out a fire with an extinguisher if they've never experienced that before. We provide all kinds of training with regards to safety, with regards to property, with regards to driving, especially in winter weather. But we're not the only resource as well. There's also the Texas Division of Emergency Management. I know, Nick, you got a little bit to say about the Emergency Management Division.
A little bit. So with Texas Division of Emergency Management, a year or two ago, they came out with what they call the county liaison officers. And I think they're at about 80% covered throughout the state of Texas. And these county liaison officers are there to assist the certain county that they're assigned to. So that's your liaison with TDEM. That's a good contact to have. It's a good resource to have. So if you don't know who yours is, Google it, find out. It's a good person to have in your phone book, and they can definitely assist you.
Okay, well, finally, to finish out, you've been hearing a lot from Nick and I today, but that we are not your only resource. Depending on what part of the state you are in, you have a independent risk control consultant. So for example, Nick handles the Northwest. Like we said, I handle the Southeast. I will say that's a very old photo. My head is no longer that smooth. But we also have Harold Hall in the Northeast part of the state and Rudy Estrada in the Southwest part of the state. So if y'all have any questions with regards to risk control, with regards to safety, with regards to vehicles, property, risk management, feel free to give us a call. We help out in multiple areas. We are consultants. We can provide advice on policy. We can provide advice on strategies, but we can also provide a little bit extra when it comes to, for example, training or property inspections if you need help with that. So feel free to give us a call at any time. Let us know what concerns you have. I know we have some of you on here and we kind of blew through a lot of this very quickly. A lot of information to go over. Does anybody at the moment who has attended, does anybody have any questions, or is there any concerns that y'all would like to voice? All right.
I just wanted to point out too, I put a link in the chat to our webinars archive page. So if you have someone that you think should or would benefit from the information in this webinar, you can point them to this webinar archives page where they can watch the recording from today, as well as see a list of all of the webinars that we've had this year and actually last year as well. So that is in the chat. And so we don't have any questions, so we're going to go ahead and close it out today. And thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.